Hello, I'm Will Yeoman, CEO Writing WA, and welcome to another episode of Pod Street, Writing WA's official podcast, where it's my great pleasure to be joined today by Raf Gonzalez, who's a Latino multi-disciplinary artist. Born and raised in Perth, he comes from a family of migrants who moved from El Salvador to Western Australia during the Salvadoran Civil War. Raf is a proud Aspie whose work highlights often marginalised diverse identities, raising them from supporting character to protagonist and giving them the agency they often aren't afforded. Raf has been supported by DADAA and the Centre for Stories with his writing. Raf, welcome to Pod Street.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I should say that we're actually sitting on the first floor of the State Library looking out over the Perth Cultural Centre, the museum, the skyscrapers in the distance. We've got Pika, and I know this is quite dear to your heart, this whole area of Northbridge, isn't it?
It is. It kind of was like the place that opened me up, like once I left high school, and I've been a city rat for a long time. So,
well, I'm just shuffling my copy of your amazing new collection at the moment, Viciously Poetic, which is why we're talking today. Yeah. Would you be happy to read out your poem Northbridge for us?
Absolutely. All right. The city has two sides, one during the day and one during the night. On both sides, I spy the melting pot that revels among the streets. Crossing the Horseshoe or Yeoman Square, I can see the cultural heart of the city from here. The art galleries, the library, the museum Boulevard Dip, and theaters named Blue and Heath. I glimpse the hidden gates to Chinatown before I enter the street named James. Past the spicy aromas of caculas, across the brass monkey, the neon lights of the Rechabite. I spot the murals of my alma mater TAFE. Further down William, the Moon Cafe. I cross over to Aberdeen, past the old Aida Cafe, long since forgotten, but still familiar. Continuing towards St. Bridget's Cathedral, a place known to me since I was a child. I pass by the place that opens my soul to writing, the Centre for Stories. A city of two sides. Some call it a notorious extension to the big metropolis, but to some of those who call it home, it is the beating heart among the streets.
Oh, thank you, Raf. That was wonderful. Mm-hmm. And yeah, again, as we were saying before, it's such a fascinating and diverse part of the city. And for me, probably my favourite part of Perth, if you take Perth as a whole. I mean, it's got so much character. Yeah. It's got its rough sides, but it's also got its okay. To summarise, it's poetic.
Yep. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Yeah, I wrote it because I thought I'd want to do something that is in the style of Walt Whitman, who was a well-known cosmopolitan who wrote most of his poems that were very focused within New York City, for instance, and. He was like, I think I remembered, I was just reading a little bit of the first bit of Lilac's Bloom, which was his famous poem he wrote around the time Abraham Lincoln was shot. And he wrote about how it was during the processions of Lincoln's funeral and around the streets, and how it was a much impact. But only he could write that feel of that time. So I thought I'd do something like that, but for Perth.
Oh, look, it's beautiful. And I'm glad you mentioned Walt, because it's not just in that poem, but there are a lot of your other poems in the collection that I feel his voice coming through.
I guess in a way I inadvertently developed a similar style to him, because I watched his documentary about the early foundations of New York.
Right.
And when it got to the 1800s, they brought up Walt Whitman, and I heard snippets of his sonnets and his poems, and so I listened to this, like how what his feel and what his vibe was, and so I kind of used my own input to find that for my hometown, which is Perth.
No, I think it works marvellously well. It's that sense of making it new, to taking older forms, older traditions, older poets, and representing them in a new context, which I really love. The other thing I'm interested to talk about is your other big talent, which is as an artist. And for those of you who are obviously just listening, you can't see the wonderful cover of Viciously Poetic, which is designed by you. Tell us a bit more about that.
Well, it's called Undercurrents, the cover.
Yes.
The thing was, this one is interesting because I did this around the time of the the pandemic, which I don't usually like talking about. Most of us do not like talking about
And there's a poem that specifically deals with that in this collection as well.
In a way, yes. There's another image that was also featured in there.
Right.
It's with a face of sleeping.
Yes.
That's for another painting called Dreaming Under the Tides.
Right.
That one I made years ago through watercolors and mix in Photoshop to give it the aquatic feel. This one on the cover, this was around the pandemic. I needed to do something to occupy my time, and so I had a screenshot of like a, you know, like when you're trying to look at light from the water and you're seeing the waves, you know, like coming through, like the light glimmering. I basically try to recreate that in that.
Oh, fantastic.
I just used like a Photoshop app and then just painted over it and try to capture it as best as I could. And yeah, that ended up becoming, I used it as my desktop cover for my laptop. And I just gave them this for design brief because I couldn't use my own designs at the time. I thought, I was under contract, so I couldn't do that. I got the itch to give them my own flavor. I even gave them a mock-up cover that I designed that was like a bit like a collage of some of my own art. And they really liked this one for some reason, that they chose it. And so that felt really, okay, so now this feels more my book. It's like I'm not using anything, it's like it's all me. And that's what I felt really great about, was that.
Yeah, look, I think it works beautifully in terms of representing the collection within the pages. What I also like is the whole idea of being both a visual artist and a poet. And of course, there's such a great tradition going back. You think of more automatically of William Blake, for example.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering whether in the future you're going to incorporate more of your artistic work with the poetry.
I think I might, because even growing up, like as far back when we had Roald Dahl's books, we also try to look at the images and what Roald had in mind for both Willy Wonka and the Grand High Witch, for instance.
Yes.
But it's like, but even just as far back as when we were kids, like even if we were reading Paul Jennings and stuff, they would have little images, or we think about that as far back, further than Western civilization would be, as far back as, the Stone Age, or like the cave drawings. That was the oldest form of storytelling, was you mostly using visuals to demonstrate what happened, like those famous paintings in France, like the cave drawings in France.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Actually, that reminds me too, because you mentioned the influence of the Japanese anime and manga and that kind of thing, and I'm thinking going back to the Chinese and Japanese tradition of woodblock prints, there was always a poem, beautifully calligraphied, and some gorgeous image, often done with a brush in probably a matter of minutes. I mean, it'd be great to see you move in that direction at some point.
Yeah, it would be really good. I think it's just that, I think it as well because as of recording this, I think they're doing the West Australian Best Yarn. They now included a comic book.
They have indeed a graphic novel
art
section.
Yes. Though we'll see how it goes, because I think some of us are keen, and my parents have been thinking of telling me I should, go for it. Though it's just like, okay, I had to find one that if it's a short story, word count, and if it's a full graphic, I need to have time to draw.
Yes, so maybe next year.
Maybe next year, but it's like, I need to prioritize which one to do first.
Of course. It's certainly a lot of money. It's a very generous prize.
If for the win. But it's just that I definitely would think maybe up the runner-up prize a little bit.
I think so. There's a huge gap, isn't there, between the main prize and the categories. It's massive.
It's like, I mean, come on, 4,000 for the runner-up. I mean, maybe 2,500.
And the main prize is like 50,000.
Yeah, so maybe at least 25 as a consolation.
Agreed.
Yeah, that's just my hot take for that.
Yeah, looking at something I might be able to mention. I'm actually part of one of the judging panels, which is the last one before the main judges.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So a lot of work involved there. So I might pass on that.
Yeah, it's just for the runner-up. I just think at least something.
I think you're right.
It seems fair, at least.
100%.
But even as well with the graphic, maybe a little bit more for the graphic one, because again, there are a lot of people putting all their heart into the
absolutely
drawing.
So much work.
I mean, if it's like Garfield looking, that's fine. But it's just like there's some who just put in a lot more detail, a lot more effort.
No, 100%.
Like, yeah, I think because I identify more as an artist than I do as just a writer. No, I refer to myself as a an art, just like an artist, multi-disciplinary artist, which is because I dabble in both. Because I mean, I took up poetry because I was working through writing manuscripts, and it was like one of my mentors at DADAA was like just trying to get me into other art writing forms, and then poetry came up, and then only when we discovered spoken word that kind of like freed me up, because I used to be worried about poetry because I had to find a rhyme. I've only done a few rhyming poems, but a majority of them are just mostly based on rhythm and like finding that flow in there.
And certainly when you talk about rhythm and flow, it really needs to be heard. You need to lift it from the page. And I guess that's a third aspect then, because if you say you're a visual artist, poet, and performer, there's the performance aspect, which makes it 3 areas, not just 2.
Yeah, well, the thing is, one of my mentors at DADAA was a performer.
Yes,
and she used to, Noemi Hunter Conros, she used to do stuff at the Blue Room Theatre.
Right.
She's a really great person. I think she's now in Melbourne these days. But she kind of taught me about the concept of blocking, and that really helped me a few weeks back when the story Soiree. I just came out of a cold that night, and I was just trying to memorize, because I was reading out a short essay, or more like a contemporary letter called A Mole Rat's Letter, which was me critiquing Garden City, aka Westfield Bergen. And I was like, okay, just try to block, remember when to pause at certain moments and put in, well, just give it attitude. And so that's how I also add into the poetries as well. It's just how do I feel at that time, and then how to make people feel that way
too. Of course. No, 100%. I was also struck by the section which you've titled Folklore.
Yeah.
That's got some amazing poems in there as well.
And those ones most of them were inspired by the folklores from El Salvador.
Yes.
That I think I wasn't aware of them so much. And even though my dad used to call me his el cipetillo, which is his little boy, but it's like I learned that cipetillo can be meaning many things. It could be an endearment, or it could be just calling you a brat.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Because there is a folklore around that name, and it comes from an old Nahuatl word called Xipitotec, which is based on an old Aztec god that was like at harvests and farming. But there's like a lot of interesting roots that I learned about, because mostly with Latin Americans, we often just focus more on the Spanish side of ourselves, but we're also what we're called mestizos, so we're mixed breed. So we also carry a little bit of the Mesoamerican side to us, which is like the Aztec, the Mayan parts of us, and so we incorporate a little bit of those into their folklores. And I found so fascinating about them, and so it was something that I was able to ask my dad about a lot, even my mom a little bit about what were the kind of things they did before TV, basically. Like, my parents were kids in the 50s, so back then in El Salvador, they didn't have TV, but they had elders or grandparents who would tell them, these ghastly stories to scare them straight. And I think one time my mom mentioned her grandma told this one story of La Siwanaba, who is a famous, she's our answer to Baba Yaga. And one time, one kid went screaming to their parents because they were scared, but it means it was that good, that effective. But it was like, oh, if you're not nice, and La Siwanaba will come for you, and such. And so all of those things are very fascinating. And I thought, okay, this is something I don't hear many Latin Americans. I mean, we do kind of, if you were thinking of Mexico, or Mexico, as I got so used to calling it now, refer to La Llorona, the weeping woman.
Yes, of course. Yes.
Like, she's become very iconic, especially after Hollywood did the movie The Curse of La Llorona. I don't say the weeping woman, it's just like, no, La Llorona is much more impactful. But it's like, there's a lot of folklore that we kind of incorporate into our into our art and into our styles. And as I mentioned, like in Even Japan, like Pokemon, for instance, as a millennial that grew up with that, they mostly incorporated some of the yokai, these folk creatures,
the magical monsters and so forth,
into among the Pokemon designs. Like the artist incorporated those. Like I think one Pokemon example would be Ninetales, who's a fox Pokemon that had 9 tails, is based off the Kitsune, which is a Japanese,
the fox,
Japanese fox trickster spirit. And so, and it's like, and if you look at several recent Pokemon editions, they've incorporated a lot of that. It even bringing in from outside of Japan as well, like those myths, and even fans of Pokemon would make their own designs and would take from like their neck of the woods as well. And so it's like, it's like even like I said, there's limitless options there. But also, if we can't, sometimes if we don't see anything that's new or that's something that's been done to death, okay, what about we have something that has not really been encouraged or been noticed, that's been around in the background, but it's
still traditional, but it just it's been ignored of late.
Exactly.
Yes. I mean, you're also tapping into that rich tradition of the links between poetry and mythology. If we go back to the Homeric hymns and so forth, for me, poetry's always been so much about mythology, so it's fantastic that you're thinking along these lines with the traditional folklore as well.
Yeah, I think it was just finding anything that ever interests me, because there are things I don't really like. If there's things I don't really want to bother about, because those are very, like, big rabbit holes you do not want to steer clear off. You want to steer clear off, basically. But it's like, it's things like, these are things I would rather tell or rather want to reach out to.
Yes.
Or things that give me the gripes, I have to write it, because otherwise it'll just be, pulsating in my head for so long. It's like, I need to get it out, or otherwise it'll drive me nuts.
Well, there's sort of that great tradition of what they say. In fact, some poets in the Renaissance period used to call it a complaint or something, and then they would just have a bit of a whinge, to get it out of the system.
I've done that too.
Well, there you go.
I think a majority, some who have picked up my book will notice that there's like, oh, I was just also coming out of some hospitality jobs.
Yes, I certainly saw that.
It was something, it was a comfort for me when I started my first job, which was, for those who will be surprised, I worked at Red Rooster for 7.5 years.
Well, my goodness, that's a long time.
Well, since I was 15.
Right.
But that was my first part-time job.
Sure, yes.
But I didn't really go up to manager or anything, because I've seen the managers over time, and it's like the one thing they get pissed off were complaints. Whether it's and stock take.
Yes,
that's often because and so I just thought, and also I've dealt with incompetent managers. One, but I will not name for good reasons, and I've matured from that. It's been a long time already. I think coming up next year will be 20 years ago when I went and worked at my first job.
You've got any plans to celebrate the anniversary?
Probably not.
You could write a commemorative poem.
Or just get a meal at Red Rooster. Seeing how far they've gone since I left.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that you're able to incorporate all these kinds of experiences into your poetic personality in a way as well, which is fantastic. Look, Raf, I think we might... There's so much to talk about. We could talk all day. Let's finish with a poem, though. I'll leave you to select something that you would like to read for us.
All right, I'll try and find something good.
You could just randomly pick any poem.
But I find a good one. You have to find it has to be a good one. Because otherwise...
We want to finish on a bang, finish on a high note.
Well, there is one, because as of recording on Saturday will be my birthday.
Well, happy birthday for when it comes.
So it's a good one for those who need this. It's called A Lonely Birthday. I remember the first time I woke up alone on my birthday. It was a strange feeling, and I didn't like it one bit. Usually, I would sleep in a bit and get breakfast in bed since I was a kid. As I got older, breakfast was prepared by the table, Las Mañanitas playing in the background. I made it a mission to never celebrate my birthday alone, because the first time felt quiet. This year, I couldn't sleep over at home because of winter bugs floating around. After a pile-on domino effect of a week, my thoughts run wild and amok. I think of the worst things. I like my birthday was forgotten 16 candles style. But I am definitely not going to go down that road. Not today. I will try to make most of the day, even if it wasn't how I had thought. So, I will stay positive and calm like Turanga Lila on a birthday stroll among strangers in Futurama. Maybe it's just me, but maybe there are others who have had to celebrate alone for other reasons. So, to whoever this poem goes out to, know you are loved and that you are not alone. Spend your special day with those who care about you, both friends and family alike. Just remember to also have a moment for yourself. Go out and have some fun. Maybe catch a movie and get a free smoothie at Boost, as long as you don't feel lonely. But make it count by demanding a gentle, warm birthday hug and a slice of cake you like, because it's your birthday. Happy birthday and feliz cumpleaños to all the lonely ones out there.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's a rare treat to have had you on the show on Pod Street. I really should, but don't want to forget, a bit of a call out to Red River and the Centre for Stories. It's like a collaboration between the two, so New Delhi and Perth, let's say Northbridge. Yeah. They're doing amazing things in poetry, just as this one collection amongst many that have been coming out. Yeah, so it's great to see it. So thank you again, and look forward to seeing where your future takes you.
Thank you. And for those who want, you can find me on Instagram, and just because I post some new poems out all the time, and I pair it up with a song to get the feel of it.
Okay, so what's your tag?
Rafa.ed.gons89.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. You have a great day.
You're welcome. Thank you.